let me see. Yes, I can control. Okay, so this is about meta control, and I explained that. I will be a little bit repetitive because yesterday I already rushed through this. I will do it again because the crowd is not exactly the same. Sorry for that. This is according to my understanding, the old-fashioned understanding of cognitive control, which is the Super Mario idea, who is not running. I think now I lost track again. Yes. Let's see. No, I cannot. Oh yeah, now I can control it. Yes. So the Super Mario idea that control comes from above and is made for us to overcome obstacles in the way. So the will is the primary force. This is the idea. So this is the old-fashioned concept of willpower, and cognitive control serves to make the will reach its goal. That's basically the idea. Well, I was not happy with that, and others were also not super satisfied because there are many other situations that are also including control, but have the opposite outcome, namely that, namely that we want to get rid of things like flexibility. We want to have a new idea. We want to have, can you put this up again? I think a little bit of feedback would kind of help me to orient myself. And the idea is that control actually is about two poles of probably one common domain or dimension, which varies between stability and flexibility. Some people have slightly different terms, but that's about the main key. Resistance is our preference. And that it has some, let's say, different authors have approached this from different angles. Some are coming from a more functional point of view, like Goschke, who says that there are different situations in life, and not all of them are best covered by persistence or stability of goals. Sometimes the opposite is recommendable. And others are coming from a more neuroscientific point of view. They are arguing that there are striatal and prefrontal systems, dopaminergic systems that are struggling for control, and depending on the preference or the dominance of one or the other, we may be more stable or more flexible. Others are doing the same story with receptor systems and so forth and so on. Anyway, now I lost control again. Let me try to do my old trick. Yes. The question which is related to individual differences, which I try to explain, but also intra-individual differences, is the question of where do I find them? So do we need to look into personality psychology or whatever? And I was struck by this overview of Bogac, who tried to identify the commonalities among many different decision-making models that are biologically plausible. And he comes up with two different principles, basically. One is competitiveness, which means that the neurons are competing for dominance in the central nervous system, and that the same may be true for representations, in the sense that whenever I tend to do A or decide for A, I would suppress B, and so forth and so on. And the other is that we are driven by goals, in the sense that representations or options that are consistent with our current goal is more likely to be chosen. Now, from that, it follows that these two principles might underlie intra and inter-individual variability, in the sense that if I optimize, if I strengthen both the goal impact and the competition, I end up logically with persistence, with a very stable system that holds things in check, as it were. And if I reduce the power of both, flexibility would come. So I'm a little bit biased by my goals, and there is a little bit of competition, but it's not very strong, so that I can jump back and forth in my memory, basically, or my consciousness. Now, we have run many studies on playing with this idea, providing support. We have done genetic studies, behavioral studies, and so forth and so on. But there was always one key problem, namely how can we satisfy the evil reviewer 3 who asks, how do you know you made people, you were successful in biasing people's meta-control? So if we made meditation, had them meditate, or if we told them jokes, how sure could we be that we make people more persistent or more flexible? Well, we can measure their performance, but we cannot really directly access the meta-control bias. So how could we do this? We were looking for this, found no good measure until, okay? And this is what I want to talk about now. We have reached some success here. We have found a measure that we believe might be capturing quite a bit of this bias. Now, the idea comes from this. If you borrow my little cartoon model, right, so that persistence is characterized by very stiff competition between neural activities, what would be the outcome? The outcome would be, like you see on the left, there would be very few peaks in the neural activity, and there would be a lot of silence, because everything is heavily suppressed, held in check, as it were. GABA is boosting, let's say, and silencing everything, and so forth and so on. And this is indeed typically what you would expect from a strong prefrontal cortex-driven, old-fashioned control model, which is about selection, which is about focusing, which is about silencing, and so forth and so on. So the perfect model for this would be the one focus at one time model, so purely serial, if you will. Whereas if you take my right flexibility cartoon model, you would end up with pretty much the opposite. A wild forest of tons of activation here and there and everywhere. There would be a lot of stuff going on. So in other words, it would be much more noisy. If you would want each peak take as a talking person, and if everyone, we had many peaks here in this room, everyone would be talking, there would be literally a lot of noise, whereas if only one is talking at one time, as we keep it now, the left model would be more appropriate. There would be not a lot of noise, there would be lots of signal. The interesting aspect why I'm explaining this is that there has been suggestions in the literature on especially EEG signals arguing like the following. There is a pre-story about this, and that comes from physics people who are arguing that we typically celebrate the signal and are disgusted by the noise. And that may not be right, because there are some indications that noise in and outside of the human brain might be serving interesting purposes, let's say. And then driven by this, it was increasing interest in EEG signals. And if you look into EEG studies, then what you see is tons of papers on periodic activity. Some are specialized in alpha, others in beta, others in delta, and so forth and so on. So there are people who have particular interests with respect to which periodicity they are interested in. But no one is interested in noise, in the stuff that is left if you extract all the regularities and all the periodic activity from the pool of signals. But they are, Dono and others were interested in building this kind of mathematical model that you see on the right, where you basically order all the, let's say on the x-axis, you order all the activities, the power of the different bands, frequency bands, I want to say, and then you make a regression line on this, and the steepness of this is called the aperiodic exponent. And the idea is that a very steep exponent is characterizing very little noise in the system, where the low frequencies are dominating, and so that makes the exponent steep, or the regression line steep, and therefore the exponent high. So a high exponent stands for little noise, okay? So the absence of noise basically is measured. Whereas if it's flattening, the regression line is flattened, then this would express a low dominance of low frequencies and a relatively high dominance of high frequencies, and that would be suggestive of a lot of noise in the system, and that would be characterized by a low exponent. So keep in mind, low exponent means lots of noise, high exponent means very little noise. That's confusing. That's why I keep using these two pictures on the left on my scale, so that it reminds you of what the logic is. So we were interested in this. This is the relationship here. A shallow function, high noise, steep function, low noise. We were interested in this because if you think about the tasks we were using in our behavioral studies, for instance, the Simon task is considered to be related to this, let's say, to be good if you would be perfectly persistent. If you would only concentrate on what's relevant, if you could ignore everything that is irrelevant, you would be performing perfectly, so that here a high exponent would be a good thing to have, right? And the same goes for convergent thinking, if you want to think deep, as it were. However, if you want to do divergent thinking, if you want to be flexible, find a new idea, or do something like this, you may actually benefit from a lot of noise, which means a low exponent. So with that in mind, we looked into various kinds of data sets. We started with fMRI, so not EEG signals, where we looked into the Stroop effect, and we found that indeed, if we measure the variability of the neural variability in particular areas, like shown here in the attention network, the higher the variability, the bigger the Stroop effect, which means that you suffer if you are variable. However, if you do, the same thing we found in the convergent thinking task, the RAT. Here you see that let's say, the increasing variability in the different areas like parietal and motor network and so forth, ACC, there you see that the worse performance is in this task. So you cannot think deeply if your brain is very noisy. That's the story. Now then, moving to EEG, we used data from the Dresden laboratory of Christian Beste, and here you see a go-no-go task where the go signal is particularly frequent, so that people are kind of having the tendency to go, basically, whereas the no-go is made difficult because of the need to suppress. So the idea would be here that you would benefit from denoising your system if you are having a bigger executive challenge, which you should have in the no-go situation. And that's exactly what we found. As you can see here, the exponent is higher for the more difficult, hard to suppress no-go condition, as you can see on the scale. So this means or implies, according to our logic, that you denoise the system in the more difficult challenge situation. We also looked into creativity. The AUT is a kind of a divergent thinking task. So here you want to have a noisy brain, was our idea at least. And the RAT is think deeply. So if you think about what is this, well, the AUT presents you with one topic like cup or one concept, and you are to generate as many related things that you can imagine within a certain amount of time. So almost anything goes. Whereas the RAT is heavily constrained. We present you with 3 concepts like cocktail, dress, and birthday, and there's only one word that goes with all 3. So here you want to have a not so noisy brain. And so this was the idea. This was our prediction, as it were, our functional prediction. In the RAT you want to have persistence. In the AUT you want to have flexibility. And this is exactly what we found. Here on the right you see that the DT is divergent thinking. This is for the AUT. Has a lower exponent than the CT, which is for convergent thinking, and the RAT. So if you convert that, this means that the more divergent that you think, the more you are noisy. The more noisy you make your own brain, basically. So that was encouraging. We also showed that this is not happening in the period between the trials, so it's not a kind of a blocking effect, but it is really restricted to the task period. So when you're really engaging in the task, then you find this difference here. Okay, that's what I just said. Oh, the question is, of course, that you may ask, why? Why would people do that? Well, what stands in the way of originality, which you need in the divergent thinking task? So here you need to come up with new concepts that are very little constrained. Now, if you really want to do that, memory is actually standing in your way, because memory has the nasty habit of popping up all the time. If you say, yeah, I know this concept, right? Yeah, I know, but we now want stuff that I do not yet know, and silencing or making more, let's say, the memory access more complicated, may be the use of noise. So you may want to noise your brain if you want to get rid of memory. That is one possible explanation, which of course we cannot directly infer from our data, but this is just one functional idea. Now, we found or lots of evidence that in, let's say, standard control paradigms like Simon and go, no go, and so forth and so on, you find increases of the exponent related to the bigger challenge. So we wanted to show that it can also be the opposite, basically disproving the original control concept. Because according to control concepts of the old-fashioned way, task switching would certainly be a control-demanding task. However, from a meta-control point of view, switching would not require persistence. It should require the opposite. It should require the absence of persistence, because you want to get rid of your old task. Okay? So here you want to have a reduction of the exponent, because it would imply more noise. Because more noise would help you to get rid of the old stuff that sticks in your memory. Now, therefore, Jimin was doing this, analyzing these things, looking into basically a replication, so the tasks were very, very similar. And in both cases, you see not much or opposite stuff, which I'm not going into, going on in the pre-trial, that is before the stimulus is presented. This was better controlled in experiment 2, as you can see. But in the within trial, so after the stimulus is presented, you see that the switch condition is clearly coming with more noise in the system. And again, so it's depending on the task and the task conditions from a meta-control point of view that we would argue, and not just calling them one, let's say all of these task control tasks is not helping us here, which I think challenges traditional control theory, or at least the uniqueness of that, or the unidirectional idea behind it, that there is more control always means the same thing. We don't think it does. There is a task that you just learned from a greater expert on this, who developed this task. It's very complicated. I'm certainly the least plausible person to explain all these details. But we were interested in the closing versus opening distinction that this task allows us to do. And we were studying the aperiodic exponent in these two conditions. And what you can clearly see in study 1 and study 2, which are very similar again, it is only the opening condition that is doing something with the aperiodic exponent. So the closing or the keeping, where you do not update, apparently, is not doing anything with the aperiodic exponent, but it strongly increases whenever you are to open this. Why is that? We take that as evidence that is not consistent with the idea that the meta control is somehow directly kind of involved in this memory task, or that it is a reaction to adjust it, the task itself, or the processing for the task. However, we do think that what's the difference between these two conditions is the degree of competition, right? So if you're keeping things in memory, there is no competition because we are shielding the content that you keep from the content that you could take up, but you don't, and you shouldn't. Whereas in the opening case, you have to replace something, and that logically induces a competition between the current content and the new content. And that could be exactly the condition where, according to Bogach, these individual differences play a role, and this is where we started. So this is where you may trigger your meta control and try to adjust it to the situation. It's probably coming too late because we did not find direct impact on the current performance, but I tell you in a second why that is. Anyway, this is our take here. So noise reduction only if representations complete. This would be our conclusion. Who changes cortical noise and when, under which circumstances? Well, we looked into, again, we're using the go-no-go task where we replicated basic things, but here we were using resting state measured before everything in a kind of trade-like fashion. So we thought, if what you're showing, the exponent that you show in the resting state, which we arbitrarily cut off into parts so that we have a low noise group and a high noise group, so the high noise group has a low exponent and the low noise group has a high exponent, and we try to predict from these data what they are doing in the task. And what you can see here is that only the high noise individuals adjusted to the task conditions. That you see on the left, especially in the more complicated no-go task. What you see here is the high noise group does change, does adjust oh, sorry, no, on the left this is the behavioral data. You should look at the right, on the right. And there you see in the rightmost panel that for the high noise group, the exponent goes up in the no-go condition, whereas the low noise group, which is already good anyway and has a very high exponent anyway, is basically not changing, not adjusting to the conditions. All right. So is everyone still there? Because everyone froze on this. No one there? Everyone froze, so they're not moving. Either they are dead. Yeah, I will.
Or maybe you
I will just
pass
very
them.
briefly
Yeah.
flash through a few more things, but then we should go to the discussion. So don't worry too much. Anyway, first I need to get control, back to control, which is probably like this. Yes, I learned. Anyway, so I just rushed through this just to give you an idea about what kind of evidence I'm talking about. I'm not trying to convince you with this. So we found evidence for a developmental trajectory in the sense that the food is increasing with age, as it were, so which fits with the idea of the prefrontal cortex being a slow developer and let's say peaking only around 24 years of age. Okay, I lost it. And you also see that with older age, so the older people then lose again exponent. So this is also consistent with this prefrontal cortex idea. So basically, high exponent, it really seems to come and go with prefrontal cortex, let's say, without us making this connection direct in this. What does the exponent do? Just here's something that I mentioned. What we looked into is whether we find any direct connection to behavior, because often it seems to be that the exponent is triggered by the stimulus, as are task-specific processes, but the exponent needs much more time, and this is evident from these data. What we looked into was whether it affects the current trial, the next trial, the time in between, let's say, the pre-stimulus time of the next trial and the actual post-stimulus time of the next. And when we looked into this, we found that there is noise reduction. This is already old news, but this is most important. When we made the correlations, we could see that the changes, the individual differences in the exponent to the different conditions did not explain or predict behavior in the current trial, but in the next trial, which means that it may take too long, typically, to make the adjustments in the current trial, but only have an effect from there on. So this would not be well captured with our trial-based experimental logic, and we are currently thinking about what we could do to test this. So the idea here just would be that the instruction enables a meta-control policy, but does not yet establish a particular state that we could measure. But then when the stimulus comes, there are control operations probably captured by periodic activity like theta, as Christian told us, and so forth and so on. But it also triggers meta-control policy, which, however, takes much more time to be fully implemented. So we need to find other measures if we want to see whether behavior itself is captured. Can we modify this? Just the brief answer is yes. We have looked into patient groups, and they seem to indeed, they do not only underperform, which is typically highlighted in the literature, but they also overperform, in the sense that some people, like in anorexia, autism, depression, OCD, overperform in persistence tasks, and ADHD, schizophrenia, and Tourette people overperform in flexibility tasks, meaning that they can outcompete healthy controls, which is something that the literature does not highlight a lot. So we are strongly looking now more and more looking into pathologies to see whether they can be characterized as hyper-persistent or hyper-flexible. We did some drug studies, also some taken from Christian's lab, to see that MPH, which helps with ADHD, is really increasing your exponent. We find that combined with transcranial DCS, this is even better. We also play with auricular transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation, which also has the, let's say, increases the exponent. So yes, we can play with the exponent. We are also doing other studies currently to do that. We also find it related to affective changes, especially the positive affect seems to reduce the exponent, which fits with creativity research, showing that positivity helps you to think out of the box, but does not help you with deep thinking. So I just cut it short here. We think that this is an interesting avenue towards this, but I'm closing this right now. You can look up papers if you want to, because I don't want to skip the discussion and use the option that some of you are still staying here. So this is our people who have looked into all these data. And I suggest that we now directly move to the discussion.